found that if you really pick apart all the mainstream conventional macroeconomic data points, they're 50 years old, if that young. So these standard benchmarks for measuring the economy, they measured the economy back when coal and steel were here. They don't measure it now that we're in a digital era.
Last week, we spoke with Nomi Prince, former banker with Goldman Sachs, and we talked about the $150 trillion she's tracking behind the scenes. But at the same time, the market was dropping 1,000 points, 1,100 points. The data points that we're looking at right now are teetering towards bear market territory and uncertainty on an unprecedented level for individual investors. Today, I have with me Andrew Zatlin, who is the founder of Moneyball Economics and a former economist who has been using very specific data points to try to figure out where corporations are headed based on hiring data and other data points, which we're going to get into right now. So the question is, where's the money going? Nomi had called it transformative technologies. There's a lot of money going into things like electric vehicles and money following the Green New Deal initiative. But at the same time, the data that flows through to hedge funds and that kind of thing is important to keep track of, because that gives a signal for what the sort of corporate world is thinking about the prospect for those new technologies to come into the economy. So first of all, I want to welcome Andrew Zatlin, Moneyball Economics. How are you doing, Andrew?
Thanks, Addison. It is great to be here. Hello, everyone.
Yeah. So what I want to ask you first is explain Moneyball Economics. I know there was a famous Michael Lewis book about the data behind the scenes that helped the Oakland A's win the World Series with a very small salary. So maybe if you could just dig in and tell me how Moneyball applies to the way that you approach data behind the scenes.
Well, I think it's the same kind of concept where you're trying to build the winning team. You're trying to build a portfolio of stocks, bonds, whatever it may look like, so that you win, right? You're going to have some strikeouts along the way, but you want to get the players right, the ones that have the potential to contribute to you being successful. That is part of the Moneyball approach. You don't want to go where everybody's going, because there are going to be opportunities that are missed. The nature of investing, if everyone's piling in, then you're not going to get as much upside. So what I found was starting in the late 2000s, there were all these new ways of doing business, where people were going to buy, what they were buying, how they were buying, totally changing. Yeah, I'm a trained economist, but I've got my feet on the ground. I got my feet on the street, and I found that if you really pick apart all the mainstream conventional macroeconomic data points, they're 50 years old, if that young. So these standard benchmarks for measuring the economy, they measured the economy back when coal and steel were here. They don't measure it now that we're in a digital era. It's just on down the line. Every single macroeconomic data point is irrelevant in the digital world. And I found that was a big gap. And so I started to track information, we wouldn't call it new information today. I started tracking it over 10 years ago, but it was net new. I mean, no one was looking at things like Twitter or Facebook or all these other places, Craigslist, that you could say, well, wait, let's see, where are people going? What are they thinking? What are they doing? And I started to go forward with the premise that this new data, combined with the way companies actually operate, would really expose a lot more insight and gives a lot better visibility. And it turned out I was right. And it's been great, because I come out of Main Street. I've worked in the corporate world, and it's really basic. If you want to know if a company's doing well or not, it's not smoke and mirrors, although they only show you every quarter how they're doing. And even then, they don't show you everything. The point is, they all operate the same way. If things are doing well, then you're going to see, it's like the poker tell that you might see in like a 007 movie, where the little bit of blood's coming out in the poker game kind of a thing. The idea though is there are certain signals that companies give out, and everyone on Wall Street is chasing signals. I just found that 10 years ago, I discovered new signals, but they weren't net new to me because coming out of the corporate world, I knew how companies operate. I knew the information that they were looking at, that a CEO and a CFO were looking at, and then what the response time would be for them as this information changed, and where you could go to look at that.
You've been entering the data into Bloomberg for a number of years, and oftentimes your data is outperforming on a forecasting level big banks.
Hey, during COVID, I was it. For jobless claims, I was the #1 guy. And remember, during COVID, we had these massive so-called surprises, and yet I was out there week after week using this data. Anyone who was reading me wasn't surprised. None of my clients were surprised. I had a finger on the pulse because, again, it's this ability to get to the right data that matters. And that's the Moneyball thing. It was all about Billy Beane building a team first with the idea that there are opportunities and players being missed. And they're being missed because people are measuring wrong. They're measuring incorrectly and then getting to the right data. And that's, fortunately, I've got my secret sauce is data that nobody else has access to. And it just time and time again, week after week, month after month, I think last month payrolls came out and I was yet again, I think I was the third, Citibank, you can kiss my ass kind of a thing. Goldman, see you later. It has to do with getting better data. It also has to do with being able to understand how bad the mechanics are of some of these benchmarks. And that gives you the edge. If you've got someone out there who's married to these old world style of measuring the economy, you've got an edge. You've got an advantage.
Well, let's talk about hiring data currently. You're digging into what companies are doing. I just heard that after a couple of years of hiring at Amazon, they're talking about laying people off post pandemic. They were net hiring for a long time, and then now it seems like they or at least they've even claimed that they're overstaffed.
Yeah, I think some of those union shops in New York might be facing some layoffs, But you're right. Netflix just announced, I think, 150 folks being laid off. And that gets right to the point. The premise is simple. Do you invest in a company that's laying off? Does that sound like they're in a good place if they're having to lean up? That doesn't sound very, very positive. I wouldn't invest in a company directly like that. But if you find out a company's hiring, it's just full blown, foot on the pedal. That sounds like good news to me. And it's interesting because working with Wall Street companies, these are really, really smart people. I have met quantum physicists running funds, and they build these incredibly elaborate models. And can I share with you something that's really interesting to me about these elaborate models? And then I've got my simple model. What's interesting is to prove the point, we've run for 4 years, for example, an ETF model that just says, look, let's take a look sector by sector. And we're going to use the same sectors, and every month we're just going to come in one time and we're going to rebalance the portfolio. We're going to cherry pick the 4 sectors that are performing the most based on hiring. Are they hiring the most relative to the others? So I would go in and I would show these fund managers, why would you want my data? Well, take a look at what I'm doing with my little Go card. Month in, month out, I would have one of the best ETF funds out there. It crushes the S&P 500. 50 basis points every month over the past 4 years. It just beats the market, so that adds up to about a 10% additional return on the market. And my point to them is, this is a simple model. You've got these complex models. I'm not trying to say I outdo you. I'm just simply saying hiring really is one of the core pieces you should look at. And what's funny is I came across this really interesting study that a PhD guy was running with, an economist. My kind of guy. He used to play the ponies. He used to go to the horse track. Gotta love that, right? So he went out one day and he started asking the touts, the guys who are outside, buy my newsletter. I'll tell you who's going to win in the 5th, mother's nightmare, and he started asking them, if I only gave you 4 variables to choose from, you choose whichever ones you want and then make your picks. He came back, found, tested their picks. Then the next week he came back and said, now I'm going to give you 12 data points, whichever ones you want, 12, now do your picks. So you have this really simple 4-pick model and this much more complex 12-pick model. And the really interesting thing was, the more complex, the more variables these guys were using, the more convinced they were how right they were, and the more wrong they were. Their performance was worse. Simple can be better. And hiring really is, if you go on an earnings call, they'll never talk about hiring. They might talk about CapEx. There's a reason they don't want to talk about hiring, because it really is the crown jewels for every company. If they're, think about it. If you let your employees know that you're not hiring, or you might be at that inflection point, that's going to hit the company morale, and that hits performance. There are many different ways that hiring can help gain insights. It can be at the highest level. So for example, I'm out there forecasting payrolls because at the highest level, payrolls is really company hiring. And you can, it's macroeconomic, it's basic. If companies are slowing down their hiring, if they take their foot off the gas, that implies one thing. If they start tapping the brakes, that implies another. And it goes down to the sector level, it goes down to the company level. Not every sector is in the same place. The economy could be tipping over, but you're still going to have some companies that do well, even in a collapsing market. And that's what's interesting about where we are right now. We've got the Fed giveth, the Fed taketh away, and it's hard to determine. A couple of years ago, last year, you could take a dead cat, swing it around, and you'd pick winners. The market was just going up, the rising tide floating all ships. Now we've got the opposite. The Fed's taking money, liquidity out of the system. Everything's collapsing. Well, wait a second. Some companies deserve to collapse. They're just overpriced. Some companies, maybe they're doing well, and that's where the hiring data can come in to help segment. Well, if they're still hiring really enormously, that could be a great opportunity once this massive bear market finally bottoms.
So during the pandemic, I'm assuming the hiring data got all wonky because there were a lot of forced layoffs, a lot of people waiting, getting government checks, waiting to decide what they're going to do next. How did that, in a 10-year span, how did that impact your view of what companies were up to? I assume there were some companies that were hiring all the way through.
If you were high tech, it didn't matter, right? So there were certain sectors, you could see it, prior to COVID, for example, I don't know if everybody remembers, there was a restaurant apocalypse and a retail apocalypse before COVID, right? And the hiring data was, you could see it, you could just see it. During COVID, same thing. So airlines, you would see JetBlue, Southwest, Delta, they went down to hiring nobody, which, for obvious reasons. But then they started creeping back. And that was the inflection point. And so I started telling folks you wanted to start getting back into the airlines industry. Now, the key thing here is, I'm an investor. And oftentimes in the past, before I started using the hiring data, I would start with a premise, right? I would have a big idea. And then I'd try to find the right play for that big idea. And I justified in my mind. Sometimes I was right, sometimes I was wrong. The beauty of using hiring data is it's a bottoms-up approach. Who's hiring? I forget the big idea. Is it an individual company, or is this a sector thing? So the sector play there were airlines, and then you could start seeing some of the online, like Expedia bookings. You started to see TripAdvisor. You started to see them start to follow suit. And that's when, that's the tell. That's when you say, wait a second. Because quite frankly, if you're a CFO, you're quick to fire people, okay? Even in America, it's very difficult to let people go. Maybe I could, Addison, you mind if I take a second and share my corporate world experience of the sort of the life cycle of hiring? All right, so this is what's interesting. Every year, we're talking publicly traded companies, larger companies, not a mom and pop dry cleaner, but some of the same things apply here. Most companies today, they start the calendar year, with a strategic plan. And this plan is based off of partly a bottoms up. The sales team says, this is the pipeline. I think I can close this business. And it tops down, finance comes in and says, what do you mean you can only grow 10% when the economy is growing a lot more? But they get a plan, and that plan drills down into how much money you can spend, software, hardware, and how many people you can hire. And it's diced up on a quarterly basis. But the point is they've got a plan. And you look for variations in that plan that say, well, wait, are you expecting more growth? And are you putting your money where your mouth is, not just talking, but actually acting? Again, hiring is one of the places where companies invest. Well, what happens is, what if things go sideways? What if there's a war in Ukraine? What if China lockdowns, COVID, whatever? So that plan gets thrown out and the company goes through a new process. But the thing here is it takes time. The bigger you are, it takes more time, but eventually that system kicks off again mid-year. You have, again, the salespeople raising their hands saying, I can't make my quota, man. That means I'm not going to make my commission. I'm not happy. That filters up until finally a management group goes, okay, we're hearing this consistently. A new plan comes out that affects hiring, that affects firing. This takes a while. Why? Well, we're in a litigious economy and culture. If I'm going to fire somebody, I need to make sure it's not some affected demographic, an older person or whatever. I got to be very careful. So now HR and legal come in. This is time. So the company knows that there's a problem. It takes time for them to act on the problem. And then it takes a little bit more for them to actually pull the trigger and then for that to show up in things like jobless claims. This is months. So imagine if you could get in there sooner, like at that very beginning of the cycle, you'd know I've got a few months before the broader market starts to get a whiff that there are problems at this company. And that's where the hiring data comes in. That's where you can say, wait a second, they're no longer doing job postings. They're no longer bringing people on board. That's the first indication that they're experiencing choppy waters. So the CFO, very quick to slow the whole hiring operation down, but they're very slow to kick it off again. Why? Let's face it, if your company's not doing well, if you're like today, right now we're in this time and place where, wages going up, people are job hopping. There will come a time when that's not the case. And so people will hunker down. And what does the executive management basically signal? Be lucky you've got a job. So they try to squeeze the employees out because when they start to inflect up, they want to reward Wall Street with earnings surprises, margin expansion. That's the name of the game. So they're slow. Hey, if I can get you to take a 10-hour week and be happy that you have a job and get you to work 12-hour days, I'm going to do that. I don't want to commit to hiring as a CFO until and unless I feel really confident that bringing someone on who I probably can't lay off for a year because, again, that's the way it works here. It's a commitment. I want to make sure that commitment is justified by business coming in. Again, hiring gets you at both stages, and you want to catch those inflection points.
Yeah, and you're getting the data before it works its way through each company and makes it to Wall Street Journal as good or bad news.
Yeah, you want to be positioned. Now the question is timing, and that's where the market can be really mean because again, sometimes it doesn't matter how a company performs, right? The market last 2 years, it didn't matter if you were doing good or great. The market was going to push your stock price up no matter what. There was just all this money out there. And you're kind of experiencing the opposite effect today. You have companies that are releasing what I would consider really good earnings, really good results. I mean, beating the pants off of where we were in 2019 and getting slaughtered by the market. So there's some issues with how you play the information, but bottom line, if you're an intermediate investor, if you're a long-term investor, if you're a near-term investor, the hiring data can play different ways. Because if you're a long-term investor, right now, you should have a wish list. Never mind if you are at the bottom, if we're going down further, if you've got the right company and they're getting slaughtered, again, just because the stock market doesn't matter, everyone's getting poked with a stick. Get ready. You should have a wish list. Sit back 2-3 years from now. You're going to kick yourself over the next year. Gee, maybe I should have waited. I'll give you an example of Goodyear tires, for example. Just everybody knows you need tires. Every car needs 5 tires, 4 and a spare. And everybody knows that right now our auto production is in a hole. 14 million cars versus our usual 17 million cars produced. Okay, that's a big. Eventually, when we revert to where we need to be, when the semiconductor shortage and parts shortages are over, we're going to go back to 17 million cars. Goodyear tires is going to be producing. Do you buy now? Do you wait? Well, that's where my hiring data comes in. It says, well, if you want to do a market timing approach, look for when Goodyear tires starts getting to the point where they've got to hire more people to meet that 17 million car demand. That's when I would get in. You can get in now. Maybe there's a better timing, but take that longer term view. Or conversely, wait a second, they've hit the brakes. Maybe I need to reduce my position or even buy some puts.
You mentioned the guy outside with the tip sheet outside of it's interesting that you're saying that, because Preakness, I live in the neighborhood where the Pimlico, the track is, and I could actually hear the drum beat for the bands practicing for.
Oh wow, that's great. That's got to get your blood going. Yeah,
it's kind of cool. But you're talking about the guy standing outside the track who wants you to buy his tip sheet. And you mentioned there were four indicators that's what you would ask. So hiring data is one. What other kinds of data do you look at in order to see what the health of the company is in kind of adverse? We definitely have adverse market conditions right now, but also the uncertainty of supply chains right now is kind of a thing. And then also, we also have this weird kind of social distortion going on where people, like you said, they're either job hopping or they're just like, screw it, I'm not working anymore.
exactly.
It seems like, it's you also mentioned restaurants. Restaurants are trying to hire and staff up, but people aren't willing to work.
So,
so what other kind of data points are you looking at?
Well, and that's where I like to go. So I start with hiring just to tell me, big picture, which sectors, because again, most companies are in spaces that are, their competition's enjoying the same thing, right? Hertz and Avis are going to face the same conditions. Now, each one may deal with it better or worse, but in general, call it the market sector factor. What's going on in that space? So for example, you go into a recession, a lot of people are going to default. So there are companies that make money, unfortunately, when people feel pain, like an easy pay type of situation where you get cash money today based on your paycheck tomorrow. Why would people turn to that? It's 0% environment. Well, because they've got problems. There's going to be cyclical and counter-cyclical, but I look at the market sector in general, and then look at the strongest of the strongest, weakest of the weakest. So I don't think we start and stop with hiring, but hiring does indicate which sectors are doing better, which ones are doing worse. And then I like to look at just in general, so one thing that happened back in February, which I thought was interesting, put on my tinfoil hat. Late February, Russia goes into Ukraine, right? Launches a war, special operation. Prior to that, hiring suddenly bumped up at Lockheed, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. Suddenly started to accelerate. I got to March, obviously we all knew, wait a second, once that war was launched, weaponry might be on the table, but there was no commitment yet from the US. But as March advanced, these were the companies where I saw hiring just go parabolic. They were just full on hiring. So I looked at that sector and I advised my subscribers, you need to look at this sector. And the same thing with agriculture. Now, a tops down view would have said, wait a second, let's talk about Ukraine, let's talk about Russia and their role in the agricultural world or the commodities world and how significant a play they are and how disrupted that could be. That's the tops down approach. And that was a good thought process. I then used the hiring data to say, well, wait, it's the same thing, right? They're hiring over here, but which one seems to be hiring the most relative to where they were? Tinfoil hat, I thought it was interesting that it was starting in February. Perhaps the US already had some plans or some ideas and were already sharing them with the vendors saying, hey, it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to buy a few more, Patriot missiles or Javelins or whatever. Be that as it may, that was the play to make in February, March, getting into defense industry. Again, I start with the hiring data. I look at the sector. Is the sector also strong? Now, we get to a place where it's divergence. I hate to think that I might somehow discover something that Wall Street hasn't discovered yet. Sometimes in the past, that seems to have been the case. Most of the time, it's a question of how early am I? Because remember, Wall Street's packed with super smart people, and they are looking at tons of different data and variables. The opportunity to beat thousands of these folks is slim to nil. But those are just a handful of the players out there. And the broader market oftentimes succumbs to, the bullshit that we hear that's out there from the sell side, those experts out there saying, buy, 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 that's not where we want to be. We want to be in sync with Wall Street. This last week, as everyone knows, hedge funds are required by law to reveal once a quarter their holdings. It's a little bit lagged, right? It's 6 weeks after the end of the quarter. All these hedge funds, and let's face it, the market is driven mostly by the big pocket hedge funds. They're coming out and they get to reveal way after the fact what they did with their money. And sure enough, they dumped high tech and they got into agriculture and they got into defense industry. But that's late. The play is already made by the time we see it. It's a confirming signal. It's like, great. So I'm in sync with the deep pocket money, but I missed the real opportunity potentially. So where my data comes in and says, no, you can basically be in sync. They're making smart bets because they're informed. This hiring data can get you to the same place pretty much at the same time. And guess what? Isn't that interesting? They dumped tech. Isn't that about when Facebook and Netflix, there were no more buyers?
Yeah, and they were moving into agriculture. We did a whole segment on food shortages,
Farmageddon,
post-war,
yeah,
and then also energy shortages as well. How does the hiring data help see a sustained trend? Because the shortages were sort of headline news, both for food and for energy. But then they're kind of growing, like on the macro narrative, they're continuing to grow as something that's happening in the future, not necessarily impacting right now. We have inflation and we see prices going up in gas and also in at the grocery store, those kinds of things that are starting to bother people. But if those shortages are a sustained problem, how does the hiring data help understand what's going to happen, say 6 months from now?
Yeah, it's nuanced. So from a company perspective, when they bring someone on board, and I don't mean like a McDonald's where, it's an at-will kind of, I can hire or fire every week and not worry about it. Let's talk larger enterprises where once they bring someone on, that's a longer term commitment. Again, they need to have certain factors trigger that hiring button. And oftentimes those are commitments. Now, remember, in today's world, what's really interesting is a lot of business now is done subscription. And I don't mean like the Harry's razor blade subscription, but that is the reality. A lot of companies, both business to business, business to consumer, they like to move to this subscription type of arrangement. So again, they have a certain predictability of business. They layer in hiring as a response to whether that is zigging or zagging. A subscription might be up in 3 months. And if they're not feeling good, like I saw an article the other day about Netflix where long-term subscribers are falling off. So if you're Netflix, it's not COVID subscribers that you're losing only, it's others. And so you have to start responding to that. That's, is that Disney or is that the market? And that's where the hiring data can come in. Is this a Netflix specific thing where there's been a shift? Everybody just loves to watch Moon Knight. Nobody really cares about Ozarks, that kind of a thing. Or is it in general, what's happening at Roku, what's happening at Hulu? And that's where you get a little bit of confidence. The idea that hiring today, what's the time frame, what forward visibility? I think that's really interesting. In general, hiring today is for revenue 90 days, 180 days out. What's interesting is during COVID, Addison, it varied. A lot of high-tech companies, they pulled in. They have high-tech companies in particular have a really good view. So it's fascinating. Apple knows exactly what they're going to be selling in October when January comes around. Walmart starts their Christmas ordering in January, 10 months in advance. Okay. These companies prepare well in advance. You just have to sort of scoop your ladle in and taste what they're tasting. Hiring data, it depends. It varies by sector. When you're GM, you're hiring for today. You know that if I put one more guy on the line, I can crank out 100 more cars a month or whatever their KPIs are. With Facebook, do you really think that if they don't get that engineer, oh my God, their revenues crash next month? So there's a certain forward. And what was interesting is the high-tech companies are competing with each other for talent. So they try to hire as soon and as much as they can. And COVID kind of pulled that in. It varies a little bit by sector, but you get 90 to 180 days in general of forward visibility. And remember, hiring it's a moving target. The CFO taps the brakes, steps on the gas based on, I've got to go to Wall Street. I've got to have an earnings number, an EPS number. I have seen companies push out hiring by 2 weeks because that added a penny to their bottom line. And let's face it, for that particular company, 2 weeks didn't really affect the top line. What do we care, right? But it enabled them to maintain their margins and enabled them to get the EPS target that they needed to get.
Can you give me a few examples of how you've used the hiring data to make money? Just because I think we've talked about it in broad.
Yeah. Let me think of a couple. So on the one hand, there's how I avoided losing money. So capital preservation.
That's always a good one.
I think right now it's especially one. I actually have been more bullish perhaps than I should have been in the stock market. I want to say, is the stock market the economy? You got to be careful there. The economy can still be raging, but as we see, you raise rates and in the near term, at least, the stock market, it takes it on the chin. Where I've had some missteps was looking at the hiring, looking at the economy and going, things are still strong. I'm still bullish in the market. Now, my hiring data over the past 2 months peaked. 2 months is not enough for me to stop. 3 months, the next month is going to be the trend, and I'm interested to see what happens. And of course, that's at the aggregate. Some sectors, what's interesting to me, I'll use an example. I did really well getting into energy because I saw massive hiring at companies like, and I can throw some names out, Hemmelrich and Payne. So I started to see companies like Eaton and Devon, these gas companies. I started to see hiring at FMC. I started to see hiring move up over the past couple months, starting in February, and not just February, going back a couple more months. But again, I like to see a couple months of action before I pull the trigger. Energy sector was going up. It makes sense, right? And then you kind of sit back and go, well, why would this, does it pass the sniff test? I'm seeing something, but what is, well, yeah, oil was starting to go above 90 bucks and then starting 100 bucks. Then you get the Ukraine war, which means devastation to supplies, just disruption. And then I started to make my pick. So I went after a couple of companies that are in what's called the E&P, exploration and production space. So I jumped into a company called PTEN, not to be confused with Peloton, Patterson. Believe it or not, that if you're Exxon, you're not drilling, dude. It's like owning the gold mine. I'll hire somebody. I'll outsource the actual mining. And that's what the oil industry does. But here's the catch. There are companies out there that these are short-term contracts. And with oil at 100, 105 bucks, that when that contract comes up for renewal, hey, I'm going to raise my rates. And that's what's happening. And so sure enough, saw a lot of hiring, and then these companies have done really well. But it's a longer term play. In the near term things, the market gets a little bit weird. Another interesting play is a company. Well, I got lucky, got into Northrop Grumman. That was my pick for the industrials, for the defense industry, because I started to see, as I mentioned, the defense industry taking off. Then it was a question of which ones seem to be accelerating their hiring the most. Again, just saying, hey, if you are screaming for people, I'm going to put my money on you. And that brings up another variable that we haven't talked about. What else would I look at? Well, that then goes into the technicals, the financials of each individual company. Who's got the best debt to equity? Who's got the best return on investment? All those other things that anybody can get on an income or a balance sheet. You can look at it, pore over it, and then decide, if I had to choose between Lockheed, Boeing, where would I go? In this case, I like drones. So Lockheed was another one. And also avoiding, not getting into retail and unfortunately, airline stocks I got into a little too prematurely, but I think that's a question of, again, going back to how do you time it? Airlines have been hiring. In fact, if you listen to the latest earnings release from United Airlines, the CEO, I think Scott, I forgot his last name. The CEO came out in his recent earnings, I think it was 2 weeks ago, just saying, I haven't seen it this incredibly awesome. And we haven't even seen business travel pick up. So I got into an ETF called Jets, waiting for that one to take off. See what I did there? Waiting for Jets to take off.
Yeah, that's Frank Holmes, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, Jets is the ETF that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so there have been some recent plays that I've made where I've done well. Went into Arch Coal. That was my thinking was, this is now where I layer in just, we all have that what if here, since I was seeing all energy go crazy and since I was seeing disruption in a lot of the commodity space, I figured coal would take off as an alternative to liquid natural gas in the U.S. especially, where we can flip between coal and gas, but also the rest of the world. You know, we may have a green economy and that's wonderful and feel good, but the rest of the world isn't there. They're still using coal. So still seeing a lot of signs of strength, but some sectors are cooling off and some sectors are holding well.
So how, if I'm an individual investor and I want to take advantage of the data that you're publishing through Bloomberg, but how do I take advantage of it? Like if I want to look at hiring data and make decisions accordingly. I'm assuming you publish the data and then you also give your analysis of it.
Well, we have a newsletter, and that newsletter, we've got different variations depending on how much information someone wants. You know, I talk about twice a week a video that's open to everybody. Just, you know, here's what I'm seeing. It could be a quick glimpse at macroeconomic data points, because again, the market responds to macroeconomic data points.
It does.
Kind of bring it to just the general seasoned investor. You know, why is this going to matter, and what should you expect? Down to, you know, here's a trend. You really need to have, you know, for example, a couple months ago, I was beating on folks saying you've got to have an agricultural play. You have to. We're facing what I call Farmageddon. The data says it, but just, you know, do something. Or hey, the market's going to collapse. You know, that's a video. That's everybody can do it. Where I won't share a specific play, but if you want to subscribe, sign up through that. There's a sign up process where you can come in. I'll give you every week, twice a week, specific ideas that I have. And then there's another one that we're going to be releasing shortly. It's basically a crash alert. Now that we are finally at a place where mad money isn't going to be perpetually just boosting every stock price, now that we're at a place where you can have 20% stock price drops, let's take advantage of it. You know, everyone seems to think you can only go long on a stock, that you can only be bullish. And the answer is no, you can be bearish. In fact, the 7 biggest trades of all time were bearish trades where someone came in and said, absolutely, there's going to be a housing market collapse. And I'm going to bet against the housing market. Remember, Wall Street is set up. Pension funds are set up to do exactly one thing. And it's unfortunately like a Wolf of Wall Street experience. They're set up to take your money, right? Every payday, a certain amount of money from every worker goes into a 401k plan or something similar. Well, I've never seen in a 401k set of options the chance to go short. They're always long. Do you want to go long mid cap, small cap? Do you want to go long bonds? You don't have the choice to not be in the market unless you want to be in cash. They're set up to take your money and specifically buy something. That's not what Wall Street players do, by the way. In case you're curious, anyone who's listening, you should know that whenever someone makes a bet on Wall Street that they're going to buy something, they simultaneously are selling something. If I think coal is going to be really super awesome, I'm shorting something else that I think typically trades in the opposite direction. If I think, for example, a lot of people are going to start defaulting on loans, well, then I want to short the bank and I want to go long the company that benefits when customers default. Wall Street shorts. Wall Street goes negative on stocks. And as you're seeing right now, the reason a lot of times that you're seeing a Target go down 25% in a day is because you've got sharks swimming. You've got the big boys who say, I think Target's overpriced. And the more it goes down, the harder I'm going to make it for someone who's long. They have to sell even more. There are ways that you can take advantage of what Wall Street does. There are ways where you can say, I'm not just going to bet heads, I'm going to bet tails. So we've got another report that we're releasing starting, I think, at the end of this month, where every month I'm going to share 2 specific, just follow the pick, hit the button, and these are back tested. I don't know if folks are familiar with how Wall Street hedge funds set up, but they have an idea. Let's say any money manager, portfolio manager has an idea. What they're going to do is they're going to test it. Right? You don't just say, oh, I think this is a way to invest. They harness 10, 15 years worth of actual events. And they say, if I were to have, starting 10 years ago, put this in play, what would have happened? So they call that back testing, not real time, but not looking backwards and cherry picking. They say, look, this is what I want to do. If I had this strategy, how would it have played out? And that's how they enable some fine tuning. There's some gotchas that they don't see. So we've done that with my hiring data and seen, holy cow, time and time again, last year, there were, just looking at last year, for example, remember last year, the market was raging, right? This year, the market sucks. Last year, the market was still raging. And yet my data was pointing time and time again to inflection points in hiring at various companies. Sure enough, those companies are down 50% or more right now. It's that kind of thing where we're going to come in and you subscribe and you say, I want to know about twice a month. Tell me what I should be shorting. Tell me that pick. Where can I put $100 down and maybe walk away with $1,000? That kind of stuff.
So I want to talk about 2 big themes. One, you have mentioned Farmageddon. So I want to talk about that a little bit because we've been digging into the food shortages and what we expect is going to be global food shortages and that will find their way into the Western world as well. The second thing is what you call the Vice Index. And that's mostly because it's an entertaining.
Put the kids to bed, everyone. If you're going to talk the Vice Index, say goodnight to the kids.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Oh, Farmageddon. Farmageddon's one of those weird. It's a train crash coming. You can see it from a mile away. We already kind of see it in the U.S., but we're not as affected. But let's just level set. Make sure you and I are talking the same thing. We're talking about disruption in various parts of the supply chain that deliver food. Maybe we could start with one thread. How does the price of gas affect things? And I would say to you, Addison, I see the price of gas affecting things in 2 ways. One, going from we're very trucking driven, so to speak. You want to get food, well, you've got to put fuel in the tractors. You then have to run the electricity that then converts the raw goods into processed food. You then have to ship it every step of the way. But gas is up double since last year. Of course, that's going to add to the cost. Of course.
Yeah, diesel higher too.
I mean, my God, man. California is $6 gas. You don't think that truckers are sitting around going, well, hey, I'm not going to raise my rates. Of course, they're raising their rates and they're passing it along. Everyone's passing along the cost of gas, but in Farmageddon, in the agricultural world in particular, it's not just, hey, every product has to bump up because gas is higher. Agriculture, you're talking fertilizer. You're talking all the things that need to be put in the ground to grow grain. Hey, it gets more expensive because not that you're moving, but actually liquid natural gas, you've got to convert that. Ammonia, these are part of the fertilizers. Okay, so now you've got more expensive fertilizer if you can get it. And by the way, some of my plays have been on CF, on a company called FMC. They're a big fertilizer company. Why? Well, start with the fact that you've got gas and that just jacks up prices. Well, you know what? You get to a point where the cost of soy is just too expensive. I'm not going to have as many chickens or hogs. It's just too expensive. So now you've got fewer poultry, less livestock available. Hey, that's just going to send up prices. So now you're just following through on how gas is affecting things. And it's not the only ingredient, so to speak. It just keeps cascading. You have a drought. I mean, Kansas is one of the world's biggest wheat growing places. They're in drought conditions and have been. That whole area has been. I think you're seeing it in California play out as well. So now you've got a situation where they haven't really had any good rain since October. Whoa, it's time to plant and these folks don't have water. Again, you have supply shortages now, not just in the US. India is not willing to export their wheat. They're a major wheat producer. And let's not forget, we have a war in the Ukraine and Russia. I don't know the exact statistics these days, But when it comes to corn and wheat and sunflower, we're talking 20 to 30% of the total world production for export. So you've got 5 of the major world producing countries for wheat and corn. The U.S., huge shortage. China, huge shortage. Another one. India, there. I mean, everywhere you look, you're just talking. So, and then you add in the issue of oil on top of all these things. You sit back and you go, wow, we have a supply shortage, and nothing that the Fed is doing is going to affect that. The Fed raising rates isn't going to magically create new wheat supplies. Mm. You see this. Now in the US, what's interesting is we're a little different. I think I read a stat that said, when you go out and you buy the Doritos, the actual food that's in there is only 5% of the price you're paying. We're a little bit less affected directly. I mean, obviously, everything's going to be going up. This is huge. Now, if you're a farmer in Kansas and you see that corn prices are doubled or wheat prices or whatever we are these days, you're a capitalist at heart. You're going to convert your acreage and you're going to start trying to plant even more. It takes time, though. You're going to convert more acreage to where you're going to make the most money. Almonds, forget almonds, man. I want to grow soy, right? In the short term, though, it takes a while for that response. So for me, Farmageddon is you've got all of a sudden, you've got the weather affecting supply globally, not just in one place, the inability to meet the demand that's going to be happening. You've got oil prices bumping up the cost of getting everything, and then some downstream effects of whatever excess supply there might have been, and not just growing, but you've got to feed your livestock. Too expensive. A lot of farmers will say, I'm not going to make it. I think companies like a Costco are in a really interesting position for this. Costco, how do you fight inflation? By buying in bulk. Costco, one of the top providers of gas. You can go out there and gas up your car for cheap, and you can do it one-stop shopping. So I like the Sam's Club, Costco kind of ideas for facing this, but it doesn't change the fact we're going to have food prices skyrocket. Could this be an American Arab Spring? I mean, let's face it, Addison, not to get too political here, but let's face the timing of it all. It is almost June. We are months away from what's going to be a very polarizing midterm election, not just because the Republicans smell blood in the water. You've got all the ingredients for a really big polarized environment, not just from the economy, but now abortion is a topic on the table. We know how that's a hot button. You have all the ingredients that you had, food prices going up, gas prices going up. I don't like my politicians. I don't like, this is exactly what was going on in Syria and elsewhere when they started getting these riots going forward. I don't think it's going to get there, but let's face it, this is going to be a lot of turmoil as the summer progresses.
Let's tie this all into your Vice index thesis.
So the good news, right? We just talked about all gloom and doom and getting ready. What's interesting is how the consumer responds to this. Right now, the consumer's feeling the urge to splurge. The consumer's happy. And the latest retail data has been showing this. And people would say, "What? That doesn't make sense." You dig in a little bit. So for me, I came to the Vice Index because if you were until recently looking at discretionary spending, meaning how much money do I have as a consumer to spend and what's my proclivity to spend it? What I found is, again, go back to the basics. The way it was being tracked, no, it doesn't make sense anymore. If people feel like they've got mad money in their pockets, what do? They go out and they booze it up. They go out, they go gambling. They might go find an escort. They're different places where money gets spent. And so what I found was I could track this kind of mad money spending in a different way by looking at vices. Now, it's a form of luxury spending. If you're an economist and you hear luxury spending, you get excited because luxury spending is the tip of the spear for discretionary spending. People go out and they go. Remember Cigar Aficionado magazine? Okay, that was classic dot-com boom days. Why? Literally taking a $20 cigar and setting fire to it. I mean, what more statement of I can just burn my money, right? we go through cycles like this. And so you find these places where people are just willing to throw their money away. NFTs, for example. Notice how the NFT market has collapsed. It was mad money. What I try to do, though, is I'm looking at vices that cut across every socioeconomic demographic. You want to talk about drinking? Guess what? Once you're 21, doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, black or white, Jewish, Christian, well, Muslim, you can't say. They don't drink. But you get the idea. I mean, alcohol consumption cuts across every socioeconomic place. Gambling, same thing. If you've ever been to Vegas and you look around, young, old, Chinese, Hispanic, doesn't matter. The better part about tracking these vices, luxury, how do you track that? Is that Louis Vuitton sales? Is that Tiffany sales? How do I track that? Whereas I can track cannabis consumption, I can track escort, I can track alcohol consumption, and I've been able to do it and synthesize it in a way where you can say, wow. And what's interesting about tracking this, you're not just looking at millions of events per month, right? That's the big part. If I want to talk about consumer confidence, there are a couple different ways that it's measured today. Literally, the University of Michigan picks up the phone and calls, hold on, 400 people. Addison, every month they release this major, remember I mentioned at the start that the way we measure the economy is so outdated, it's not funny. They ask 400 people, what do you think's going on? I mean, come on, 400 people? I'm looking at millions of people every month. And that gives me, and in fact, what happens is this data is so strongly correlated with retail spending. It's correlated months in advance. I can tell you today, based on the way people are blowing through their money by buying drugs, drinking, just partying it up, what they think about 5 months from now. And that's key, because if you've got money to burn today, it's a statement about how you feel your finances are going to be tomorrow. If somebody who's worried about rent tomorrow isn't going to necessarily go out and do a big steak and whiskey dinner night. So what's interesting about this data right now, what it's signaling is, it's signaling everybody's fine. In fact, if anything, the urge to splurge has consumers out there spending even more. And so then, given that, you look around and you start to go, wait a second, why? If this inflation out there is squeezing me, why is it people, Live Nation, they own Ticketmaster, they're the top concert event performance production. They said their money rolling in today is better than it was in 2019 before COVID hit. They're seeing double-digit growth above COVID, and the year's just starting. They're seeing people pay more for these premium seats than ever. You look at the Vegas stats, same thing. People are paying more for rooms than they were pre-COVID by 20 to 30%. There's what's going on? Hey, during COVID, everyone spent already on new TVs, on new couches. It's a shift. People are spending. There's a lot more people employed. There's a lot more money to spend. But what's happening is the channel of spending has shifted. They're no longer going after things. They're going after experiences. And so everything that's experiential, well, it's been budgeted. Spring break, summer vacations, that was pretty much budgeted based on a January, February, what money I had in my pocketbook before the hyperinflation, before the Ukraine stuff started to hit. Right now, the consumer feels really, really good. There are concerns. And I think the chief concern right now is, over the summer, does the Fed stop or do they keep up rate hikes? I'll tell you why. I talk to a lot of people who are in the credit markets and fixed income and macro investors, hedge fund guys, and they keep saying the Fed doesn't care about the stock market. Don't worry about the stock market. I'm here. I keep telling them, you're insane. Of course they care. You think that a 20 to 25% collapse in the stock market doesn't lead to a reverse wealth effect? See, the Fed wants to bring down housing prices. That got out of control. And that's really what's fueling a lot of today and tomorrow's inflation. They want to cool the housing market. They want to rip that Band-Aid off. Well, unfortunately, they're threading a needle. It's really hard to pop a bubble and get to a soft landing. Look at what happened. They raised rates 50 basis points, 20% collapse in the market. Oh, the Fed's paying attention because right now the consumer's spending. But when you come back from summer vacation and it's August and your 401k is just collapsed, all this money that you've got through options or RSUs, working for companies, all this money that you've been investing through your company's plan to buy their shares, worth nothing. You don't think people are going to say, you know, I hear hiring slowing down too. Maybe this isn't the time to spend. So what the Fed essentially does is trigger a recession. That's even worse. So the Fed, in my mind, right now has to be paying attention to the consumer in a certain way. Has to be saying, right now, I see that the consumer is spending.
But if you're saying that the Vice index is up right now, what kind of turning point would you see? The end of the summer?
I would,
because
I'm watching the Vice index
airline
closely.
tickets have already been purchased and vacations have been booked, even that at higher prices than 2019.
This is the key. Most data is backwards looking. It's lagging. It's obsolete. By the time you heard about it, it's, hey, that's what happened in March. Well, a lot of things have happened since March, kind of, you know, totally different economy right now. Right now, the Vice index speaks through July. From now through July, consumers are fat, dumb, and happy. They're spending money. And in fact, if you look at the recent retail numbers, there was softness in a lot of places. One place where it was still fast and furious spending, and the one place where you see the social aspect of consumer spending, dining and drinking, phenomenal growth, phenomenal, huge growth. And remember, I see the data's sucky the way they measure it. You look at retail spending, it doesn't include airlines, it doesn't include concerts, football, baseball, it doesn't include any of these things that, to be quite frank, it'll look at how many windows were sold. You know, who cares? The amount of money spent on travel alone is much greater than most of the things that they're tracking in retail spending. They track literally something that got sold through a point of sale. They don't track consumer spending. The only place where you've got a nexus point of consumer spending, that fun stuff, is drinking and dining. And that's just, it's still really up and to the right. What happens next? That's the key. Right now it goes through July, it looks great. I'm waiting for the next month with my data. I take a look at it in a couple of weeks. I'm looking for that inflection down. And I think it's not going to come in August. I think it's going to happen in September. It could happen sooner if the Fed doesn't relent. And that's a relief rally potential.
So when you take a look at the data, then you publish it to the newsletter, and then give some guidance on what the data is telling you.
Yeah. Again, the thing that my approach, which I think is maybe a little different from other people, is I don't have a thesis and then go out to find the data that supports my idea. I simply look at the data. I let the data tell me what's going on, and I'm surprised sometimes. Hey, I wouldn't have thought you'd see growth there, or diamond prices. I love looking at diamond prices when we talk about luxury. That's part of the Vice index. You know, and you see over the past 2 months, diamond prices have collapsed. I wonder what might be correlated to a collapse in diamond prices. And so I share that information to same data points being tracked month in, month out. Millions of people buy diamonds. So it gives me a real finger on the pulse. Millions of people are buying alcohol. Millions of people are buying cannabis. Okay, if that's the case, what's the ebb and flow of those millions of events? And I share that data. Whatever it says, it says. I don't fight it. I try to interpret it, but I don't fight it.
What's the best way for people to start learning about the different data points that you're looking at?
Come to Moneyball Economics. We've got, if you start there, moneyballeconomics.com, there's going to be different ways that you can engage and get information. If you want to be a paid subscriber, that's probably the best way. And we've got different levels of subscription and services. The idea is I have my institutional investors. I'm providing a little bit of a taste of what I provide them as well. But I'm also, with this crash alert, for example, doing something that I'm not doing for them. I'm literally coming out and saying, you want to buy the following put on the following stock in the following way. So not just giving general ideas or pointing a finger and saying you might want to buy XYZ company. Feel free to take my advice, but literally giving and we've got a text service that's associated with that. Moneyballeconomics.com is your launch pad for finding out all this stuff. Some of it's free because, again, I want to inform everybody and help everyone understand what the opportunities are.
All right, Andrew, sounds good. I'm going to encourage people to go to moneyballeconomics.com, and I'm going to check back with you in July on the Vice Index.
All right, let's see where we go.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Addison. Thank you, everyone.